President Trump says the U.S. will soon take over the Hormuz Strait and designated a U.S. territory. Here to discuss that and more, our friend Don Brown, former Navy JAG and Pentagon official and constitutional law attorney. Don, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Alexandra.
So how exactly would this work, I guess, in terms of the parameters of the law? We obviously know the president likes to message in certain ways to be strategic. Is this kind of a messaging saber rattling per se of projecting strength and getting Iran to capitulate further?
I think so. Whenever you're studying the president's messaging, you go back and read The Art of the Deal. He'll say things to sort of push the issue. I think when he's saying take over the Strait, I think really what he might mean is ensuring freedom of navigation through that strait. I really can't imagine he really would want to have a territory that far away. I would be happy if we maybe took Diego Garcia out in the middle of the Indian Ocean, but I think he's probably talking about enforcing freedom of navigation to push back. Remember, as this MOU has now expires on the 17th of August. So it expired 2 days ago. Not that it was alive anyway, declared dead on arrival. But the Iranians have been saber rattling about wanting to take control of it and to charge fees, which is an absolute violation of international law in all areas. The UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, which we're not a member, we adhere to the freedom of navigation principles. They were doing a lot of saber rattling themselves. I think the president, with this language, is probably pushing back. And sure, we have sunk their Navy. All they can really do right at this point is sort of harass shipping with drones, which is substantial enough, but they really can't control the Strait.
It's funny that Iran even continues to try and say that they control the Strait. I mean, we know U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright has gone on record saying that an average of about 10 million barrels a day of oil is transiting through the Strait. I mean, that's down from about 20 at normal levels. But since they've been able to update the pipelines, the infrastructure and the surrounding, that they have an additional about 5 to 7 million barrels going through. So that's still about 75, 80% capacity of what pre-Epic Fury levels were.
That's exactly right. And you make a good point. Secretary Wright did make that point. The Saudis are transporting a lot of that, a lot of that oil through their petro line, as it's called, that east-west pipeline that goes into the Red Sea, and with some other pipelines as well. But we're at about 75% full capacity, and as you'll note, there has been sort of a stabilization of the price spikes that we saw in gasoline earlier in the war. We'd like to get the prices down even more, but you're not seeing a spike of up to 120 some a barrel. You're in the high 80s, high 70s to high 80s in that range, and it really hasn't affected the price of the pump much here or there. So the situation is far more stable than it was, and that is in part because we're about 75% capacity of moving oil, out of the Persian Gulf. And the Secretary, I believe, is correct on that.
Yeah, and let's sort of transition down to the Southern Hemisphere, Southern Command, more specifically in the Western Hemisphere. The Secretary Hegseth has really come out strong with this this America's Anti-Cartel Coalition, the A3C. I was in Panama last week with the Secretary. Colombia becoming the 19th country to join this very strong coalition. They inaugurated a new president earlier this month, so it certainly paved the way for them to join this coalition. But how, in your view, is this coalition different than other anti-cartel missions that the U.S. has undergone?
Well, I would just simply note with the AC3, with the addition of Colombia, look at where they were years ago. They were the principal driver of drug trafficking. Now they're joining the AC3. And Southern Command, SOCOM, under the command, has now added a permanent task force, the Joint Task Force Western Hemisphere, under the command of a two-star Major General. And that task force will be a permanent military arm under Southern Command to work with AC3 and also to provide an instant, military strike capability without having to reconstitute temporary forces as we had before, like Operation Southern Spear. And it's going to mean a lot. And that task force will be working with AC3, and I think you're going to see more coordination, not just in striking drug boats, but now in even land operations, with a concentrated effort against shutting down these drug cartels and other criminal activity, hopefully shutting down some sex trafficking as well, I hope.
I've spoken with experts saying that never before has there been this level of resources and commitment to sustained pressure on these cartels down in the Southern Hemisphere. So, Don Brown, thank you so much for being with us today. We always appreciate your thoughts.